So on the show today, Shawn Desjardins. So Shawn is joining us from Canada. He is the founder of Mindful Martial Arts, also does some circus stuff and mechanical engineer in a past life. So Shawn, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So we're just getting to know each other, and I think it was Georgia Very from Australia who connected us, and she did a very cool podcast on trauma-sensitive kickboxing. She said, you should talk to Shawn. I was like, cool, why not? So welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So how did you get interested in martial arts? What was your journey with this?
So, yeah, I guess it's a long story, but I'll start with, I was a mechanical engineer going to university, and I was absolutely obsessed with watching fights, watching MMA, watching especially an organization called Pride in Japan, which used to put on these crazy events. People would fight 4 times in a night against people of different weights and different skill sets, and it was almost like Street Fighter, in real life. So strange. But I was absolutely just kind of obsessed with it. And I was sitting here in like a small apartment going to university, studying like formulas in a tiny room, and I guess I craved something that was as epic and as exciting as martial arts competition. So yeah, eventually I got into a bad relationship, and then when that ended, I was like, you know what? Why am I holding myself back from all the things that I want? And I just started going for the things that I really wanted in life, and that's when I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was pretty much almost 10 years ago now.
It's interesting. A couple of things there. One is like these sensationalist events, easy to criticize, but it can really draw people in. And, the Japanese were great showmans with Pride, weren't they? And you'd have the, Hickson Gracie fighting someone twice his size or whatever. It was kind of fun. And, these days things are better regulated, and it's probably a lot safer these days, more rules, more gloves, more weight categories. Something like UFC these days, pretty respectable. But back in the day, it was certainly a lot of fun. And, I remember those first like style match-offs in the early days of Pride and UFC and Strikeforce. It was like, wow, cool.
Yeah. It was really inspiring to see smaller people go in and take the challenge of fighting a larger person and really use skill and intelligence and resilience and just all these characteristics that they needed to draw upon to be victorious.
And you also mentioned a bad breakup, and it's interesting. I've heard this from a few people. They had some tough thing happen in their life. Maybe it was a death of a parent or a child sometimes, and a bad breakup or coming out of drug addiction or whatever it was. And, they have this corner and they go, I need something positive. And there's just something sort of wholesome about martial arts that can draw people in at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's community. There's like a deep sense of community that it's hard to explain. I guess you could kind of feel that in sports as well, but the intimacy of fighting other people, it's truly an intimate thing. You really have to put trust into the people around you.
Mm-hmm. There's a few factors, isn't there? On the one hand, there's this kind of framework of meaning making and ritual, which is missing in so many people's lives. And even if it's just bowing in. And then there's this idea of just physical intimacy. Like, one time a good friend of mine from aikido, we're sitting together on the beach and we're so comfortable with each other's bodies that a third person was there, and she actually thought we were lovers because we were just so comfortable with each other, and we were like, no way, but it was like, there's a familiarity with other bodies and that intimacy of being engaged in this almost existential tussle that really brings people together.
Totally.
So you are with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For people that don't know that, do you want to say a little bit about what that is? Because we might have like yoga people listening or dance people listening.
Yeah, so my first art is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu basically stemmed from Japanese Judo. There was a man who traveled from the original kind of Judo school to Brazil and he was going around the world fighting different people, boxers and wrestlers and whatever. And he ended up teaching the Gracie family, who one of the sons, Elio, I guess, one of the founders of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he didn't have the physical strength to execute the techniques associated with judo. So yeah, he couldn't do a push-up, he couldn't do a pull-up, he couldn't really execute the throws with the intensity that was needed. So he started modifying the art so that somebody who was smaller and weaker could contend against a larger opponent. And truly, I think its basis is self-defense. Jiu-jitsu, its core, I think, is about surviving first, you know? So yeah, it's a lot of grappling. It's a lot of arm locks, chokes, joint manipulation. The kind of like basic tenets of it are to protect yourself, avoid the striking range where the more powerful person can do as much damage as they possibly could to you, take the person to the ground, establish control, and then move towards a submission.
Great. So this is, I think it was the 90s, it started to get famous because they would have this kind of challenge matches, and that evolved into the UFC and things like that. And, this idea of the smaller person beating the bigger person is a very martial arts idea, but often it's really a fantasy. But in this case, it really was the case that the people were taking on people twice their size, and it was demonstrable. Like, you can see this old video footage. Guys would come into the club and challenge them, and then they just choke them out, tap them out, and then, they try again. They say, I want to go again. And a lot of people suddenly realize that the image of the martial artist as the sort of kicking kung fu master was, actually not necessarily the most useful practical stuff.
Totally. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I started back in 2011. And I became simultaneously in love and obsessed.
Yes.
Yeah, it just... something about it grabbed me and didn't let me go, if you want to think of it in that way. And
maybe just jump on that a minute. Why does martial arts get people obsessive? Because I was an obsessive aikido for some years, live-in student, 8 hours a day. I've seen it with jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu never quite hooked me, though I could see why it could. It's very technical. There's a lot to learn. They call it, chess kind of on the floor. There's something very physical in it, something very primal in our complicated modern world. Why do people get so obsessed with martial arts? Because, it's cool, but at the end of the day, unless you're a doorman or special forces or something, you're not really going to use the practical skills every day in Toronto or Brighton, right?
So I would say that, like, in my lifetime, when I was younger, I got into all kinds of things, not to really my own doing, just being kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like people trying to jump me, or being at a party and a fight breaks out and I'm in the middle of it, or all kinds of crazy stuff, to be honest. And I never felt quite safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like I grew up in a suburban neighborhood, but I was, for whatever reason, involved in a bunch of conflict. My first day, like my first week at high school, some guy chased me with a knife. I just had a bunch of adverse things happen when I was in my teens. And so I never quite felt like confident or safe. There was like this real sense of danger in the world. And jiu-jitsu gave me this, not only this like idea that I could defend myself, but the pragmatic reality that day in and day out, I was fighting people bigger than me usually. And as I progressed, it gave me this sense of confidence to defend my physical body that extended way beyond actually having to defend my physical body. It gave me a confidence that, I guess it's almost like, like Maslow's hierarchy. Like I was able to establish safety for myself. And from that, I was able to move into other things, and I was able to gain more sense of courage and more belief in myself. And yeah, that really like sustained me.
Yeah, it's interesting that on the one hand, we could say this need to look after yourself, to defend yourself is so primal that if that's not taken care of, it undermines a lot of other stuff. So we, civilized modern man tends to think of himself as like, I didn't need to worry about survival. There's enough food on my, till COVID hit anyway, there's enough food on my plate. There's no real diseases around. There's no war. War is something maybe your great grandfather did. It's kind of like, we're not given that existential threat, but actually it's always there. Like literally I'm walking down the street, that guy could just attack me and kill me right there. And on some level, people know that, and it undermines all these other needs that rest upon that.
Totally. And I don't know if people give themselves credit for how many times in life they don't speak up because there's some feeling that they might get overtaken or dominated, or there's this like amorphous, background threat of what if it goes sour, like, am I able to handle myself?
Yeah, I told someone to fuck off the other day. I hadn't done it in years, but like this guy was incredibly rude to me, and I just wasn't going to take it. And the people in the shop was just looking at me like, this is outrageous. I just said, just looked the guy in the eye and said, why don't you fuck off?
Yeah.
And in that moment, I was utterly unscared if he would attack me or not. Now,
Yeah.
I had no intention of doing him any physical harm. I haven't physically hurt anyone in many, many years. But I knew that he couldn't physically hurt me. I looked at him, I sized him up, I felt my body, and I went, no, this guy can't physically intimidate me in any way. I can say the exact thing that's in my mind, which at that moment was fuck off. Another day it might be, something else, right? That's much more vulnerable. But I didn't fear the physical consequence, so I was free to speak how I wanted to speak at that point.
Super fair, yeah. There's something about like having some force behind your no. Like fuck off to me is like a strong no, It's like, no, you're not going to come in here and act this way or treat us with disrespect or whatever the scenario is. So having some force behind that no is like, it gives it strength and it gives it power and it makes it effective. And having a strong no is so important in life, I think.
And one thing I was thinking about here is if you don't have your own no, you're sort of reliant upon the state. Yes. Like the state has a monopoly on violence, except for martial artists, right?
Yeah.
Like legally it has a monopoly on violence, right? We have the right to self-defense. That's about it. But what that means is that you're essentially in this childlike position in regard to the state if you can't defend yourself.
That's brilliant. I 100% agree with that. It's like, oh, the laws will protect me. It's like, usually that's true.
But also the guys, the police are a long way away. Some part of me feels like, if I only have to use martial arts physically, like once in my life, but if that one time stops my wife being raped, that was worth those thousands of hours, right?
Yeah.
Like if you know what I mean, like, that one time stops you getting killed. So I go, this the physical, but maybe more interesting to those of us who live in pretty safe places is how it affects the psychological.
Totally. Like I was gonna say, like hopefully we never have to use that stuff. And to be honest, like the more that I trained, the more I found myself going into other people's conflicts and trying to be helpful because I wasn't scared anymore. So get into a fight, I'd come in, I'd be like, "No, it's all good," grab somebody very calmly. It's okay, don't worry, man. Like,
yeah, you develop not just to defend yourself, but the ability to be more altruistic.
Totally.
Like, hey, how can I help? Are you guys okay? It seems like you're arguing. Is everything cool? The one I've always found to never advise getting anyone in the middle of is a couple who are having an argument, because that always ends badly if you become the third person.
I actually did that a couple of years ago. I was staying at a friend's apartment and I heard some screaming, like bloody murder in the hallway, and I didn't even think it was like an impulse. I just immediately went outside and this guy's like berating his wife, and the wife is sitting there scared with a kid, and just like, he's got that look in his eyes, that kind of like rage that is kind of blind. So anyways, I asked him in a really intense way if he was okay, just to get his attention. And then all that rage went right, and then his domination, his anger, his rage came straight into my eyes. And I wasn't afraid. I was super activated, but I wasn't afraid. So I kept on asking him, like, are you okay? And then when he saw that I wasn't going to cave to his energy or to his anger, it almost like he had nothing to reflect it back to him. His wife was submitting because she was afraid.
Right. Submitting creates more dominance, but not submitting doesn't if there's no aggression. Right?
It's neutral.
We do this exercise in my training where someone screams abuse in someone's face. This is all done with consent and calibration. The Paul Linden principle is one of my main teachers. And if you just sit there loving them, they can't keep shouting at you. Like, I've not seen anyone keep it up for more than 30 seconds. I'm like, shout at me for as long as you can. And 10 seconds in, most people stop. They just can't keep hating you if you're not dominating or not submitting.
100%. It's that presence, right? And with that presence, it's like, there's like a mirror, or like maybe if you're able to be in the state where you're even showing compassion for them, it's even stronger. But